Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would note, I think this may be the first meeting the new senator from Montana, Mr. Walsh, I believe, is on your side of the dais, has attended. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Nice
Yeah,
to have you. Welcome.
I think I can barely see that.
Well, welcome. It's good to have you here. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the good work that your staff and you, members of our committee who are involved with much of the legislation that we're discussing today, and their staffs to get us to where we are. And so thank you for your leadership and the way that your staff has worked with ours and other members on our side. Let me just say that much of the attention, I should say, in this markup has been on the advanced manufacturing and forensic science bills, and I look forward to discussing those measures when we get to them shortly. On the forensic science bill, I do want to underscore one point that I think we all agree on, and that is that our efforts as the Senate Science Committee to enhance forensic science should not be interpreted as questioning the integrity or professionalism of the law enforcement officials, forensic science practitioners, and prosecutors who are working hard every day in our criminal justice system, most of whom work in our states and not for the federal government. The overwhelming majority of these men and women are working diligently to achieve justice, which includes both the conviction of the guilty and the exoneration of the innocent. In this pursuit, we want them to be supported by the best available science, and we need them to be a part of the process. Mr. Chairman, along these lines, I appreciate the many changes you've made in the bill to ensure collaboration with the forensic science community. Mr. Chairman, in addition to these higher profile bills, I would also like to briefly highlight a few of the other items on the agenda. First, I want to thank you for including Senate Bill 2086, the Reliable Home Heating Act, on today's agenda. Senator Klobuchar and I have introduced this legislation to help states better respond to propane and heating fuel shortages. This past winter, much of the country faced severe heating fuel shortages, which were accompanied by record high prices. These shortages were due to extreme cold temperatures, regional supply disruptions, and a very wet corn harvest. In late January, after requests from industry and outreach from members of Congress, the Department of Transportation extended state emergency orders for 36 states, including my state of South Dakota. These emergency orders provide limited regulatory relief for commercial motor vehicles transporting home heating fuels into the affected states or regions. Under current law, the governor of a state can issue an emergency order for a 30-day period, but only the Department of Transportation at the federal level has the authority to extend these orders if warranted. Our legislation would give governors added authority to allow them to better meet the heating fuel needs in their states. This legislation is co-sponsored by several members of this committee, both Republicans and Democrats, and I'm glad the committee will consider it today. I'm also pleased that we will be considering S. 2028. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the Sports, Fish, Restoration, and Recreational Boating Safety Act, which you and I have sponsored. South Dakota takes great pride in our hunting and fishing opportunities, which attract a large number of visitors who take part in our state's wonderful outdoor offerings. As the co-chair of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, I know this strongly supported and user fee program has proven to be successful and has broad support from sportsmen across the country because it sustains fishery management, habitat conservation, and boating safety programs. Mr. Chairman, although we have a long list of bills today, as you've mentioned, I would also note that we have deferred consideration of Senator Heller's bill, as you also noted, on the consolidation of FCC reports, as well as the bill introduced by Senators Schatz and Wicker on the National Sea Grant College Program until our next markup. And I do appreciate their willingness to continue negotiation on these measures, and I hope that NOAA works with us on some needed reforms. Mr. Chairman, as is sometimes the case, we are also advancing a few bills today that may require some additional work before the full Senate considers them. For example, I understand that Senators Klobuchar and Hoeven have made changes to their bill on the privacy of data collected by vehicle data recorders, which many of us have co-sponsored, but they are still in discussions about additional modifications that may have to be made. Additionally, when we turn to Senate Bill 1468, the manufacturing bill sponsored by our colleagues, Senators Brown and Blunt, I know we plan to underscore our shared commitment along with the bill sponsors to find a viable funding offset. This will be very important to a number of our colleagues who share some concern with creating new federal programs, and we'll discuss a little bit more about that later. But, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you, and with that, I'm prepared, if we have a quorum present, to move to consideration of the agenda. Mr. Chairman, if I might, and I appreciate and will look to Senator Blunt to offer that motion here momentarily. I just wanted, as I noted in my opening remarks, before we get to the substance of the bill, just mention and reiterate the understanding that we have as it relates to the legislation moving forward. And While the underlying bill is modified would create a new authorization for the Department of Commerce to facilitate various manufacturing innovation centers in partnership with other federal agencies in the private sector, we jointly agree that it's critical that this legislation have an offset that would cover the full cost of the bill before floor consideration. As we both know, finding an offset can be a challenge due to various committee jurisdictions, but based on the good faith that's been shown regarding this legislation, I would appreciate it if we could reiterate our shared understanding regarding certain preconditions regarding future floor consideration. Mr. Chairman, I suggest we move. We have one more item on the agenda, which is the Forensic Science Bill, and I just want to speak, if I might, really briefly to that. As again, I noted in my opening remarks, I appreciate your willingness to adopt changes to this bill since its introduction. I know this issue has been a priority for you. Your substitute amendment reflects several changes negotiated by our staffs. Among other things, these changes recognize the important role of the Department of Justice and Forensic Science, as well as the critical roles of state, local, and federal practitioners of forensic science, particularly in the development of consensus standards related to forensic science. The substitute also addresses budget concerns by more closely aligning the authorizations to current ongoing efforts at NIST and making clear that activities authorized by the bill must be funded out of otherwise available appropriations. We also included a provision to make clear that none of the funds authorized would threaten DOJ Coverdale grant funding, which comes from a different funding stream. The package that we will be moving today also includes modified versions of amendments I filed in advance of the markup. These amendments increase the transparency of standards, development efforts, increase the consultation with practitioners, and set a minimum level of participation to ensure that practical concerns are heard and addressed when these new standards and research plans are developed. Given the many improvements that have been made to the bill and the good faith in which we've negotiated these changes, I do support moving the legislation along in the process. And as I observed in my opening, however, Mr. Chairman, I would say I think it's important for us to continue to engage the criminal justice community and address issues of importance to them. As you've noted, the Judiciary Committee Chairman Leahy has also recently introduced legislation on forensic science with Senator Cornyn. I look forward to discussing these issues with them as the bill advances, and as our Judiciary Committee counterparts work to develop consensus on the elements within their jurisdiction, and as we potentially merge those efforts in advance of Senate floor consideration, I would expect that we will continue to address the outstanding issues that may arise in that process. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would now move that the substitute amendment to Agenda Item Senate Bill 2022, I should say Agenda Item 8, Senate Bill 2022, the Forensic Science and Standards Act is further amended by Thune Amendments 1 through 6 as modified, be adopted and reported as modified with the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I might just, with respect to the substance of the bill, thank Senator Blunt as well as our colleague Senator Brown for their willingness to make meaningful changes to the bill. The substitute amendment offered by Senator Blunt does reflect weeks of bipartisan negotiations. It makes several improvements to the legislation. Among other things, and I think Senator Blunt has noted, the substitute lowers the authorization level in the bill by half, adds a 10-year sunset to the bill's funding authority, repeals and consolidates 2 potentially duplicative programs at the Commerce Department, and includes additional changes to enhance transparency, improve oversight, and ensure the contemplated manufacturing centers can stand on their own in a reasonable time period without ongoing federal assistance. It's that kind of bipartisan give and take on legislation, I think, that's characteristic of this committee's work and will hopefully continue to characterize the consideration of the bill as it advances out of the committee. That said, while I believe the bill is markedly better, I continue to have significant reservations about the legislation. And I would just say, in principle, while I strongly support the goal of increasing advanced manufacturing in the United States, I do remain skeptical about whether additional federal involvement and federal funding is really the missing ingredient needed to spur that innovation. It seems to me that the most promising manufacturing technologies and processes, the ones that are most likely to warrant financial assistance under the bill, are the same ones that are most likely to attract private sector investments and state-level tax incentives. I also think that meaningful regulatory reform, tax reform, and enactment of trade promotion authority could benefit an even greater number of manufacturers than perhaps would benefit under this bill. But as I noted at our hearing on the bill, Christine Romer, who was the former chairwoman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, has said that the President's manufacturing initiative, which is very similar to the bill that we're considering, will probably have only a small effect on job creation. And so I want to just say that I'm, compelled to reserve final judgment until suitable offsets have been identified for the program created by the bill, and I know several of my colleagues on this side share that view. And it's for these reasons, if the bill were called to a roll call vote today, I would have to vote no. But having noted my reservations and having discussed this bill with several of my colleagues, we're prepared to move the bill by voice vote in recognition of the good faith negotiations that have already occurred and that we expect will continue as it heads to the floor. And again, I want to credit Senator Blunt, his staff, your staff, Mr. Chairman, my staff for the good work that's been done. I think this bill has moved significantly, at least in my view, in the right direction.
You can count on that.